The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The presidency of the United States has been so debased under Donald Trump that it's sort of become like a piece of gum that you stepped on a few weeks ago. Like, it's a reality. There's gum on the sole of your shoe. Every time you walk around with it, it's more and more covered in dirt. And at some point, you're going to have to deal with it. But maybe you'll just not put that pair of shoes on for a while or pretend that the gum isn't there so that you can save yourself the annoyance of having to deal with it. But this is a reality. There's gum on your shoe, and the American presidency has become completely debased. And what the hell am I talking about? Well, this all relates to Jamal Khashoggi and Donald Trump's increasingly unhinged and erratic and dishonest perspective, which is providing more and more cover to the Saudi royal family, which we've been told now by the CIA was directly involved, that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman specifically ordered the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul, Turkey. And we're going to get to Trump in a second, but first, just to kind of catch you up, Jamal Khashoggi, a journalist working for the Washington Post, an American resident, not an American citizen, went to the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, to deal with some paperwork related to a marriage-related thing that he had to do, was killed there. And then we received multiple contradictory explanations from the Saudis. It's hard to even remember all of them. I think at first the Saudis said, we have no idea, we have no clue, nothing happened at the consulate itself. Second story was, well, Khashoggi did go to the consulate, but he left very quickly. And if he was killed, it certainly had nothing to do with anything that happened at the consulate. The third story was one that was actually fed to Donald Trump, which is, okay, he did die, and we know he died, but it could have been anybody, including rogue killers. The fourth story was he died in an interrogation gone wrong. The fifth story was he actually showed up and started a fight at the consulate. Why a 60-year-old man would start a fight with 15 people, we don't know, and why that led to him dying, we also didn't know. And eventually what we learned is that 15 Saudi agents flew to Turkey, killed Khashoggi inside the consulate. Direct links between the assassination and subsequent dismemberment to the Saudi royal family. The CIA says they have a bunch of evidence. This includes phone calls, documents, much more. And the CIA also explained that even without the specific evidence that they have, it would have been very reasonable to believe that the Crown Prince was involved, because we know he's involved in everything in Saudi Arabia, down to the micro. But in this case, we also have intelligence and documents that tells us what went on. So then we get to Trump. Trump, in response, has said that he was both fully briefed and not yet briefed. But either way, he was very strongly told by the Saudi Crown Prince that he wasn't involved and had absolutely nothing to do with it. But he's also not going to be listening to the audio tape of the incident because it is, quote, a suffering tape. Let's talk through it because it's so absurd. First example, Trump asked about this over the weekend, standing outside the White House, gives an answer that suggests that he simply has no idea about anything, but he's going to look into it, again with the helicopter blaring in the background. And he opted to not say that he believes any of what was known at the time, but instead praised Saudi Arabia. Take a listen to this.
Well, we haven't been briefed yet. The CIA is going to be speaking to me today. We have not been briefed yet. As of this moment, we were told that he did not play a role. We're going to have to find out what they have to say. But we're taking a look at it. You know, we also have a great ally in Saudi Arabia. They give us a lot of jobs. They give us a lot of business, a lot of economic development. They have been a truly spectacular ally in terms of jobs and economic development.
So then Trump is asked again later on in the weekend, okay, so were you briefed? Have you listened to the recording that is part of the evidence now? And Trump says, no, and I'm not going to listen to the tape. Take a listen to him talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday.
Turkish President Erdogan says that he has shared a tape with the U.S. and other countries that is of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Have you, one, either heard the tape yourself or been briefed on it? And if so, to your mind, what does it show?
We have the tape. I don't want to hear the tape. No reason for me to hear the tape.
Why don't you, why don't you want to hear it, sir?
Because it's a suffering tape. It's a terrible tape. I've been fully briefed on it. There's no reason for me to hear it. In fact, I said to the people, should I? They said, you really shouldn't. There's no reason. I know everything that went on in the tape without having to.
And what happened?
It was very violent, very vicious, and terrible.
The president of the U.S. simply refusing to check out the evidence we have for a horrific murder committed by one of our allies because he doesn't want to hear the suffering. And you know what? At least the guy's admitting that the tape exists. That alone could be considered a victory in the climate of lies and deception that we're dealing with. And then, after claiming to have been briefed and not to have been briefed, here's the key to this entire thing.
A month ago, you said you had spoken with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and that he had told you directly that he had no knowledge of this.
That's right. And still says that.
But we now know that some of the people closest to him, some of his closest advisors were part of this. Question, did MBS lie to you, sir?
I don't know. You know, who can really know? But I can say this. He's got many people now that say he had no knowledge.
What if the Crown Prince, speaking to you, the President of the United States, directly lied to you about
it? Well, he told me that he had nothing to do with it. He told me that, I would say, maybe 5 times at different points.
So what if he's lying?
As recently as a few days ago.
Do you just live with it because you need him?
Well, will anybody really know? All right, will anybody really know? But he did have certainly people that were reasonably close to him and close to him that were probably involved. You saw we put on very heavy sanctions, massive sanctions on a large group of people from Saudi Arabia. But at the same time, we do have an ally, and I want to stick with an ally that in many ways has been very good.
That's it. That's all you need to hear. The facts are unknowable. Will we ever really know? And hey, this is an ally that is good for us. Do not allow yourself to be sort of hypnotized or lulled into thinking this is no big deal. A permanent resident of the U.S. working as a journalist for the Washington Post was murdered in a terrorist attack on foreign soil by one of our allies, dismembered by one of our allies, and Donald Trump allows them to decide what he thinks. This is one of the weakest, most beta reactions to terror that a president could have. And you know, Pat, it's Canada and France and Germany and the UK that are the problems, but Saudi Arabia and Russia are the trustworthy political players, despite the fact that even to Trump they are lying. This guy is weak, isn't he?
Yeah, I think this story demonstrates 2 things. One, Trump's disdain for the media, the fact that he won't back up a reporter who was brutally killed. And also, it admits the U.S.'s longstanding ties to Saudi Arabia, which are unethical ties. And to go back to your beta comments, I think that it is really beta that Trump won't watch the video. I mean, most people aren't going to want to sit through that, but it's kind of the job as president. You have to observe those types of things, like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton sitting in the Situation Room watching the raid that took down Osama bin Laden. Sometimes that's just part of the job.
Yeah, and Trump, as we know, picks and chooses which parts of the job he wants to do. Last thing on this, watch for Jared Kushner to have been much more involved than we know, because he is in very heavy contact with the Saudi Crown Prince. And I would not be surprised if we end up finding out more about his role in this entire thing. And I don't mean he had an active participant role, but knowledge about what it was that was going on. Big news actually related to the First Amendment today, to the government limiting the speech of people and of the press. Most of the time, the right talks about the First Amendment, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the First Amendment. YouTube banning people over terms of service, or private businesses making decisions about how their employees should behave while on the job. Those are not First Amendment stories. All of a sudden, we do have a First Amendment situation with Jim Acosta of CNN. And the backstory, of course, now memorialized in a video that has been looked at like the Zapruder film. Jim Acosta asking questions of Donald Trump during a press conference. That led Donald Trump to become displeased with what was going on. Eventually, a reporter, a White House intern rather, coming up to Jim Acosta and trying to take the microphone from his hands, Jim Acosta's arm getting entangled with hers, and eventually that press pass being revoked from Jim Acosta. A lawsuit was filed against Trump, against the White House, against some White House officials. And most recently, a federal judge ordered that Jim Acosta's press pass be returned immediately while the press pass revocation works its way through the legal system. Now, meanwhile, Trump is saying, number one, that the White House is writing up rules and regulations for reporter behavior. This is important because of a ruling from the 1970s, which held that if the White House is going to remove press passes, they need a specific process in place that outlines how and why press passes will be revoked. I told you about this case last week called Sherrill v. Knight. The judge, Timothy Kelly, who decided to give Acosta back his press pass, he must be just some left-wing, activist, liberal, in-the-tank, shilling judge who... Oh, he's a Trump supporter. I'm sorry, he's a Trump appointee? Oh, gotcha. A Trump appointee is the one who decided this. Important to know, there has been no ruling on the case. This is a temporary measure while the case is being adjudicated. And additionally, the White House has already said, as soon as the judge's order expires, because it is temporary, they will be immediately re-revoking Jim Acosta's press pass. I don't know ultimately where the legal side of this is going to fall, but I relish the awkwardness I anticipate when Acosta is back in there. Trump's not going to be able to keep his mouth shut about it, right? And I know that nobody has to call on Jim Acosta, and maybe that's what we see them do. I would love to see Jim Acosta back there on his first day asking the exact same question that caused all of this verbatim and seeing what happens. And this entire thing, understand, there's two sides to this. On the one hand, this is a story of adults who can't get along because a president simply doesn't respect the press. And Acosta knows how to get under Trump's skin, and he does that on purpose. That's all true. Maybe not everybody is acting as adult as they should here, but that's not a surprise. But we actually have First and possibly Fifth Amendment questions now about what was done. And all of a sudden, the people on the right that are always incorrectly saying that's a First Amendment issue and this is a First Amendment issue, and you've got this other First Amendment issue over here, none of which are actual First Amendment issues, they are silent about the fact that this actually could be a First Amendment issue. What do you think is ultimately going to happen with this entire Jim Acosta press pass thing? Let me know. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me say a quick thanks to Sherry Andrews, who is today's new member of the day. Also want to say thanks to a longtime supporter dating back 5 years, Christopher Salerno, longtime supporter of the show, actually a lifetime member. We only have a handful of lifetime members who took advantage of that offer. I think it was years ago during an Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign. Well, Christopher is not only our longtime sustaining member of the day, he is part of a very elite and exclusive group of lifetime members. Sherry, Christopher, thanks to both of you. Join them at www.joinpakman.com. The Trump administration is really good at something. Now, this might come as a shock to you that I'm coming to you today and telling you what they are really good at. The Trump administration is excellent at what I call having oops moments, where they admit the thing that they've made a concerted effort to deny for a very long time. So I'll give you some examples. When Donald Trump fired James Comey, we all knew it was to interfere with the Russia investigation. Everyone associated with Trump denied it up and down, came up with every absurd explanation about why he did it. And then Trump was interviewed by Lester Holt, and he admitted, oh yeah, it was over the Russia probe. Likewise, Donald Trump has been going out of his way to avoid the obvious reality that the guy he installed as acting attorney general after forcing Jeff Sessions out, Matthew Whitaker, was installed specifically to interfere with Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. And in fact, Whitaker has this huge public record of opposition to the investigation. He has written in a CNN op-ed exactly what tactical approach he would take to stop the investigation. Shortcut for you, starving it of funds. But from Trump and the people around him, it's been deny, deny, deny. Trump saying he barely knows Matthew Whitaker, despite having met him in person 12 times. And then suddenly over the weekend, Trump admits that actually, yeah, he did put in Matthew Whitaker to deal with Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. Trump was interviewed by the Daily Caller in a total joke of an interview. This interview had almost no follow-up about any of the ridiculous things that Donald Trump said. And at one point, Trump was asked, what were you thinking about when you put in Whitaker? What are your thoughts about the installation of Matthew Whitaker? We're going to put the transcript of this up on the screen for you. Look at how this goes. The Daily Caller says, could you tell us where your thinking is currently on the Attorney General position? I know you're happy with Matthew Whitaker. Do you have any names, Chris Christie? This means for the eventual full-time or non-temporary, non-acting Attorney General. Trump says, Matthew Whitaker is a very respected man. He's very importantly, he's respected within the DOJ. I heard he got a very good decision. I haven't seen it. Kellyanne, did I hear that? And then Kellyanne Conway chimes in, 20 pages. Trump says, a 20-page? Daily Caller, it just came out right before this, sir. And then Trump says, remember the questions about Whitaker. Well, I heard it was a very strong opinion, which is good. But Whitaker is just somebody who's very respected. I knew him only as he pertained, as he was with Jeff Sessions. And, look, as far as I'm concerned, this is an investigation that should have never been brought, should have never been had. It's something that should have never been brought. It's an illegal investigation. And, it's very interesting because when you talk about not Senate confirmed, well, Mueller's not Senate confirmed. We've got to talk about this piece by piece. First of all, nobody mentioned the Russia probe in the question, and Trump out of the blue mentions it. Except it's not really out of the blue because it's the number one thing that was on his mind when he decided that Matthew Whitaker was going to be acting attorney general, that he believes the probe is illegal. That's why he appointed Whitaker. So Trump very publicly, he connects the dots there. Now, I also don't want to do this again because we did it last week, but Trump is lying that he doesn't know Whitaker. He only knows Whitaker through Jeff Sessions. He said to Fox News last month how much he knows Whitaker, and he's met with him many, many times. Here's where we really need to big picture it. A really common tactic to distract people or to confuse them is to change Zoom, okay? And what I mean by that is when people are attacking you about details, you switch and zoom out to the big picture if that's more advantageous for you. It's a debate technique. It's a technique in rhetoric. When people are attacking you about the big picture, you zoom in and you argue the details when there are some details you feel you can defend. In this case, the debate has been about the details. Well, how long was Sally Yates acting attorney general? Does Whitaker have to be Senate confirmed? How well does Trump know Whitaker? Got to zoom out. And when you zoom out, you realize that if you're being investigated, you shouldn't be allowed to decide who is in any positions that influence that investigation period. And that, Pat, is what is missing from the discussion. If you understand that, if you understand that it doesn't matter whether Trump met Whitaker 2, 6, or 12 times, it doesn't even really matter if Matthew Whitaker wrote that op-ed explaining his opposition to the probe, although that only makes this worse. You shouldn't be able to decide who oversees investigations into what you've done. And that's why I think the left needs to zoom out on this one, Pat.
Absolutely, absolutely. And how fascinating is it that Trump was able to commit another unforced error here? He's being interviewed by the Daily Caller, which is an outlet that's supposed to be on his side, and yet he just volunteers this information. The term obstruction of justice comes to mind. That was floated after he fired Comey. It could get brought up again, and I think Mueller will look into that.
These are obstructive interferences, whether they meet the legal standard of obstruction of justice, we're going to have to see. And last thing on this, because there's just so much wrong with it, Mueller is running an investigation. He's not in charge of a cabinet. He's not a cabinet level position. He's just been brought in to do an investigation. He doesn't need to be Senate confirmed for that, but he actually had been confirmed by the Senate when he was director of the FBI. And that's another ruse and canard that they are throwing at you. Hey, let's get back to Chris Wallace and Fox News for a moment. We have this idea that we've seen many times where every once in a while we hear some sense from Fox News. And when we do, it's almost always Shepard Smith, but sometimes it's Chris Wallace. Today, it's Chris Wallace. Another piece of that interview that I told you about earlier between Chris Wallace and Donald Trump that aired yesterday relates to the perception of Trump around the world as an oppressor. And it's not really clear to us whether Trump knows that he's seen around the world as a guy who oppresses free speech and oppresses freedom of the press and is extraordinarily authoritarian in his tendencies. And I wonder that because we know that Trump mostly watches Fox News, but particularly during the friendly hours, which are most of them, including Sean Hannity and Fox and Friends. We know that Trump gets a twice-a-day propaganda file. And Chris Wallace in this interview goes directly at Trump about his attacks on media. And he went even further to say that Trump is seen as a beacon of repression around the world. I really like this, confronting Trump with this. And of course, Trump doesn't care or doesn't believe it, but it's still good to see. Starting with, Trump starts with, no one believes in the First Amendment more than him. Just like he once said, no one respects women more than him. Remember that?
Nobody believes in the First Amendment more than I do. And if I think somebody's acting out of sorts, I will leave. I'll say, thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate you coming, and I'll leave. And those reporters will not be too friendly to whoever it is that's acting up.
Why didn't you call on Acosta in the first place? I mean, it seems to me there's a simple solution here. Just don't call on him.
Actually, I like to do it, but in many cases I don't. He'll stand up. He's unbelievably rude to Sarah Huckabee, who's a wonderful woman. Unbelievably rude. And I see that, and I actually ask her the same. Why do you call on these people that are so nasty? And I think one of the things we'll do is maybe turn the camera off that faces them, because then they don't have any airtime. Although I'll probably be sued for that, and maybe, you know, win or lose it, who knows? I mean, with this stuff, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, okay, so then we get into the real meat of it, and here Trump also says that his supporters are just so smart, such smart people.
Let's get to the bigger issue. In 2017, last year, you tweeted this, and I want to quote it accurately. The fake news media is not my enemy, it is the enemy of the American people.
It's true, 100%. Not the media. I'm glad you're finally quoting it correctly, because they like to leave the fake news.
Okay,
out.
but that's what you said.
The fake news. So but the people that are supporting me in particular, they're very smart people. They're hardworking, brilliant, great people. They know when the news is fake. And they get angry when they see all of the fakeness. Frankly, the networks.
There have been people who've been critical of other presidents. No president has liked his press coverage.
So then we get to the confrontation. Chris Wallace saying to Trump, you are seen as a beacon of repression. Pay close attention to what Donald Trump says.
Sir, leaders in authoritarian countries like Russia, China, Venezuela, now repress the media using your words.
I can't talk for other people. I can only talk for me. I will tell you.
But you're seen around the world as a beacon for repression, not for...
I'm not talking about you, but you sometimes maybe, but I'm not talking about you. The news about me is largely phony. It's false. Even sometimes they'll say, sources say. There is no source in many cases. In many cases there is.
I understand you don't like your coverage.
No.
Can I just bring the bigger
94%
Can I bring the bigger issue up?
Yeah.
Bill McRaven, retired admiral, Navy SEAL, 37 years, former head of U.S. Special Operations.
Hillary Clinton fan.
Special Operations.
Excuse me, Hillary Clinton fan.
Who led the operations, commanded the operations that took down Saddam Hussein and that killed Osama bin Laden, says that your sentiment is the greatest threat to democracy in his lifetime.
He's a Hillary Clinton backer and an Obama backer. And frankly,
he was a Navy SEAL.
Wouldn't it have been nice if we got Osama bin Laden a lot sooner than that?
And there it is, the leader of the raid to get bin Laden and Saddam. You could be against doing those things, but this is no bleeding heart liberal. And Trump immediately discredits him and says, why didn't we get bin Laden sooner? As if that would even have been up to this particular member of the military. And there's a good thing that Chris Wallace does here. He doesn't concede when Trump says that the news is fake. Trump keeps repeating that. Chris Wallace says, I understand you don't like the coverage. He doesn't even concede or appear to concede that. And Trump does sort of appear to keep his cool, but he was not at all pleased with this exchange at all. And the real reason that this is so damaging to Trump is that, first of all, it's on Fox News. Yes, the Fox News audience is already calling for Chris Wallace to be fired, like they do with Shep Smith every time he tells the truth. But this is removing the idea that Trump is in this for anybody but himself. His inability to accept criticism, the way he reacts to every question that's remotely critical is to attack other people. Jim Acosta, says Chris Wallace, Acosta's a lying, terrible, fake news reporter who's rude to me, Trump says, which is not an argument. The guy who got bin Laden, that's a Hillary Clinton backer, and why didn't he get bin Laden any sooner? The world sees you as a beacon of repression, even our most decorated military. Well, those people don't know what they're talking about because they backed Hillary. You are seeing the unraveling of a very unwell person, someone with, yes, serious personality disorders, but it's really important not to mistake confidence for competence. Trump has maintained support to the degree that he has from his followers, not because of competence, but because his confidence, his ability to sound confident every time he opens his mouth when he's asked critical questions, is what appeals to his supporters, even though when you actually listen to the words, you realize that there's no competence whatsoever. Send me your thoughts. We will post clips from today's show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Follow me on Instagram at david.pakman as well. Quick break. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It is great to be joined today by Charles Eisenstein, who's a noted activist, thinker, and author. His latest book is Climate, A New Story. Charles, it's so great to talk to you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So to start with, if you were to say to me, hey, I've identified some problems in how the left is dealing with climate change, I would kind of have two different areas I would want to sort of think about. One of those areas would be, are those who believe the climate science doing the wrong things in order to try to mitigate the problem? But then the other side of it is the way that the issue is being communicated part of the problem in terms of getting more people to understand the reality of what's going on? Let's maybe start there. Are both of these issues, is one more of an issue than the other?
I think that they are both issues and that they are related to each other. So the way that the problem is being addressed and considered on a policy level has some of the same problems that the way that it's being addressed on a rhetorical level. So yeah, they're both related.
So maybe we'll start with the messaging part, and then that will lead us to maybe how the policy part is not actually the right approach. So first, in terms of messaging, what do you identify that is being done incorrectly by those who believe the science, want to deal with this issue, but where are they going wrong on the messaging?
Well, there's a few levels of that. I think on a very basic level, the messaging that, the essential messaging that answers, well, why should we do anything about the problem? And answers that if we don't, bad things will happen to us. I think that invoking a fear mentality that looks at nature for what it does for us, that's part of the problem. to say, well, why should we care about the rest of life? Why should we care about the world? Because bad things will happen to us. That denies that the rainforests, the whales, the coral reefs, the soil, the water has inherent value in its own right. And so it contributes to the instrumentalizing and distancing of nature that I think is at the root of the problem to begin with.
Okay, so let's deal with that in more detail. I agree with you. My question is, at this point, if you still either deny the science or are uncaring about it or whatever, are you going to be more likely to say, wow, we really do need to take action now if we talk about the reefs and other animals? In other words, haven't they already demonstrated they don't care about that?
Well, I think that the people who don't believe climate science and the general narrative of climate change are adopting that partly as part of a political identity that goes way beyond climate change. So if you are, a Trump supporter and identify generally with conservative political beliefs, then you're going to be predisposed to reject the climate narrative.
Yes.
But at the same time, you might really care about your local forests and streams, and you might not want to have your groundwater, your water table polluted with fracking fluid, and you might have places where you love to hunt and fish. So by framing it primarily in terms of this politicized global issue, sometimes we risk eliminating potential allies who might really care about localized ecocide. And that leads to the other part of my thesis, which is that localized ecocide is much more important than the carbon reductionist narrative understands.
Okay, so in one sense, I mean, I think part of what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when you hear about global ocean temperatures going up by X amount, or these sort of very planet level figures, that on the one hand, that can be hard to kind of understand intellectually in terms of what it means, or it might not even sound like that much. What's 1 degree Celsius anyway? But that it also kind of misses the ways in which individual and local communities will also be affected. Is that part of it, making it local? Yeah.
So like I'm in Rhode Island here with my wife where she grew up. And, we're down in the Narragansett beach area. And she's like, wow, that used to be a clamming beach right there, and these tidal pools, they used to have sea anemones and they used to have all kinds of, and we used to see eels in this estuary here. And like all that is gone. And the seagrass meadows, like 80% of them are gone from New England. And so people she could talk to anybody around here and they'd be like, yeah, that's really too bad, whether or not whatever their political orientation. And what I'm seeing is that these are not only local issues. Like seagrass meadows, for example, sequester enormous amounts of carbon. Kelp forests with robust shellfish populations, they sequester a lot of carbon. So even from a carbon narrative, not to mention wetlands, forests, and so forth, ecosystems contribute immensely to planetary homeostasis and climate equilibrium. And that's only thinking about carbon. If you go to the water cycle, the contribution toward climate stability of ecosystems is even greater. So it's kind of like this, do you care about the local or do you care about the greenhouse gas levels? It's kind of a false dichotomy. And we've made that a false dichotomy to some extent at least, with the polarizing rhetoric and political positioning around it, that I think is not necessary or ideal.
So let's take some of those ideas and take them to the next level. Let's assume we're dealing with folks who understand what you're saying about both the local and the planet-wide level, who either with more math or less math understand what's going on and sort of accept it. Then we often hear, okay, listen, I think that the free market's going to solve it. I think that science and technology and industry will always be a step ahead because their livelihood depends on it. If the stuff that you say is going to happen happens, all these businesses literally will go out of business. I think that that has already demonstrably failed, and that's the approach I usually take. But how would you deal with someone who tries to make that case that it's all going to be sorted out?
Yeah, there's two levels of problem with that. Three, one of which is that it hasn't worked, as you point out. Secondly, that in order for markets to take ecological health, well-being into account, it has to be monetized somehow. So there has to be some kind of metrics through which the ecological costs can be internalized onto the balance sheet. So something like a carbon tax or pollution taxes or some kind of quota system for natural resources, things like that, make pollution expensive or emissions expensive. And so theoretically, then you could invoke market mechanisms to incentivize pro-environmental behavior. But that leads to an even deeper level of the problem, which is that it assumes that ecological health can be quantified. But what happens is when we try that, we end up quantifying only the things that we are able to measure or that we think are important or that can be measured. And it's one of the deep conceits of our civilization that this is possible, that we can someday encompass the entire world in a set of data. But ordinarily, usually what happens when you try that is that the things that we don't see get left out, which actually then turn out to be really important. And that the metrics used encode the interests of the people and institutions that have created the metrics. So, what gets left out? Who gets left out? Something always gets left out. Like if you're wanting to monetize carbon somehow, then emissions are quite easy to quantify. Above ground biomass is sort of easy to quantify. Below ground biomass, not so easy. And what about the carbon contribution of a whale? What's that? If you use the obvious metrics, it's very close to zero. But when you understand that plummeting whale populations deprive the orcas of food so that they turn on the seals and the sea otters and eat them, which then no longer keep the sea urchins in check, which then proliferate and destroy the kelp forests, which no longer feed the shellfish, which sequester carbon. Like then you're like, oh, I guess the whales were pretty important after all. Too bad we didn't include them in our metrics. So I think that we need to move beyond a metrics-centered approach to ecological health, and therefore also beyond just a market-centered approach.
Yeah, that's extraordinarily depressing of an example. But I think it will resonate with our audience. Okay, since we don't have unlimited time, I want to focus a little bit on, in terms of the policy and what should actually be done. In the immediate, like now through the next 5 years, what are the actual low-hanging fruit and sort of like must-dos that the pro-environment community should be calling for and focusing on?
Yeah, so number one priority is conservation of all remaining pristine ecosystems, especially the Amazon, the Congo, wetlands, forests, because these are key organs of the living being called Gaia that maintain its health, and the reservoirs of biodiversity and the memory of healthy life on this planet. Second priority is regeneration, regenerative agriculture, healing the soil, healing the water, reforestation, afforestation, to, again, strengthen the organs of a living being. That's my whole approach, is that Earth is alive. And then thirdly, on the tissue level, to use this metaphor, to really change the repeated dousing of the entire biosphere with chemicals. So if we do all these things, conservation and regeneration, that also necessarily includes a vast reduction in fossil fuel production and strip mining. It's not just the fuels, but if we're really going to take seriously to love and care for a living being, then greenhouse gases are going to have to fall also. So,
and along those lines, Charles, I am getting more and more inquiries from self-described environmentalists who ask, is the idea of more nuclear as a bridge to getting off of fossil fuels something to be taken seriously? Where do you fall on that?
Yeah, if you are in the mindset of carbon reductionism, like equating green with low carbon, then it's pretty hard to argue against nuclear power. I mean, there are arguments against it, but it does produce a lot less emissions than traditional fossil fuel generation of power. But when you look at a ecosystem living planet view, then you don't want to mess with that stuff, because the damage that the waste and the potential accidents can cause is so horrifying that it's just inconceivable from a living planet view that you would use nuclear power.
So in the immediate then, what do we now replace fossil fuel generated energy with? Because we can have somewhat of a reduction maybe in the amount of energy that we're producing, but we know that getting people to actually reduce consumption is a big project in and of itself. In the short term, how do you start moving off of the fossil fuels, and exactly what do you move to in the immediate?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that there are any great solutions. I mean, out of everything, I like rooftop solar the best. But even more than that is conservation. And if you want to take carbon out of the atmosphere, the fastest way to do that, besides disarmament and dismantling the military-industrial complex, the fastest way to do that is through regenerative agriculture, because soil can absorb enormous amounts of carbon very, very quickly. We learned in school that it takes 500 years to build an inch of topsoil, but there are people out there like Ernst Gosch in Brazil and Gabe Brown in, is it North Dakota or South Dakota, somewhere out there, they are building an inch a year of topsoil. If we did that on a mass scale, it would quickly draw down atmospheric carbon. That's, I think, if we're going to focus on carbon, that's what we should do, because also of the side benefits of repairing the water cycle too. I could go deep into the water cycle, but I am aware that we don't have a whole lot of time.
Well, that in fact is all of our time. I do want to tell people the book is absolutely fascinating. We've been talking with Charles Eisenstein, who is the author of Climate: A New Story. We've only barely scratched the surface of what he has in the book. And Charles, I really appreciate you joining me today to talk about this.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There are now more and more calls for Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg to step down as a result of just scandal after scandal involving the social networking website. And one of the latest crises is truly disgusting. In a world of right-wing rabbit holes and discrediting techniques, is the thinly veiled anti-Semitic trope of blaming things, connecting people, criticizing movements that they don't like, by connecting them to George Soros. We know about this. George Soros is a left-wing billionaire philanthropist who happens to be Jewish. Soros has become attached to countless conspiracy theories which blur the line between sort of unhinged right-wing political conspiracies and just straight-up anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And oftentimes those lines are very, very blurred. Recently, Soros received a pipe bomb in the mail, you might remember. And the recesses of the internet crawling with the ideas about Soros came up with the idea that Soros is in cahoots with Jews to send him false flag fake pipe bombs so that Jews can generate pity for themselves, right? That was one idea that was floated after the pipe bomb. But bigger picture, there's this idea that Jews are behind the scenes fomenting social unrest for their own gain. The idea that Jews are this other working to subvert public and private resources for their gain. And this stuff has a really long toxic history, which relates to the idea of Jews as a threat, which underpinned countless anti-Jewish movements over the last several hundred years. Example, Timothy McVeigh, the 1996 Oklahoma City bomber, believed that Jews were participating in the civil rights era in support of the rights of black people as a way to take white people out of power, not because they wanted equal rights for black people, but to create a power vacuum where Jews would actually be able to take over. So I think you kind of get it at this point. You pin stuff on Soros. That's part of a very well-known anti-Semitic playbook of conspiracy theories about Jews. What's the news? And what does this have to do with Facebook? Well, we've now learned that Facebook hired a PR firm to try to discredit their critics, which ended up claiming that the critics of Facebook were agents of or funded by George Soros. Now, I know you'll say, hold on a second, David, Mark Zuckerberg is Jewish, and the COO of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, is Jewish. Why would they do something anti-Semitic? Well, of course, number one, we have no idea whether Zuckerberg and Sandberg were personally involved in hiring this firm or okaying the George Soros approach. But secondly, what does it matter if they're Jewish? As Trump has shown us, you can both have Jewish family and be signaling to anti-Semites that you're their guy at the same time. Those two things can happen at the same time. And reporters, Pat, have been coming forward saying that when they've been working on articles about Facebook, they will talk to their contacts at this PR agency, and that the people at the PR agency keep reminding them, hey, listen, these are Soros tactics, and it would be really important for you to make that clear. This is like what Soros does. And this is truly disgusting. And my only question at this point, Pat, is can Zuckerberg survive this? Because the calls for him to resign are growing. That'll be terrible for Facebook's shareholders, but they're not really my number one concern. I don't even know what the future of Facebook is at this point, because there's nothing permanent if we know anything on the internet. MySpace seemed insurmountable at one point, and it's gone. Facebook is really in trouble here. Yeah, well, it seems that Zuckerberg survived the last few controversies over data misuse, so maybe he will be able to survive this one too. You pointed out MySpace. MySpace was only around for a few years, though, whereas Facebook has now been around for over a decade, and they still have quite a lot of users. So I think they can survive a controversy like this one, too. Fair point. They also make a lot more money than MySpace ever did, so it's not the same situation. But this is absolutely disgusting. And if you're canceling your Facebook account over this, the data breach, whatever, let me know. I want to hear from you. When you're losing the argument, you start insulting people. This is true in elementary school playgrounds. This also happens to be true in 2018 in the White House. Democratic Congressman from California, Adam Schiff, is undoubtedly going to be playing a major role once Democrats take over the House in January. He's been the ranking member on that House Intel Committee, which ran a completely bogus investigation into Donald Trump. At the time, it was headed by Republican Devin Nunes, who was literally running to the White House to tell Donald Trump what they were doing. Well, the tables are turning in January, and Adam Schiff is likely going to go from being second in command to being the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Trump knows this. Trump knows that he's in deep trouble with the competent Adam Schiff in charge there. And Adam Schiff has also said that he thinks the installation of acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker is not constitutional. Trump is furious, and he's now using childish ad hominems, reminiscent, as I mentioned a minute ago, of playground insults that like 8-year-olds might come up with. Trump went on Twitter, and I'm allowed to say this because it's not the swear word. This is SCHITT, said, quote, "So funny to see little Adam shit talking about the fact that acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker was not approved by the Senate, but not mentioning the fact that Bob Mueller, who is highly conflicted, was not approved by the Senate." Again, I'm saying SCHITT. I'm not saying that banned word. The FCC, it's a name. They can't come after me, okay? There's actually a legal argument to discuss here, which is that Bob Mueller, as I said earlier, is just doing an investigation. He doesn't need to be approved by the Senate to do an investigation. He doesn't have regulatory power. He can't decide policy. This is just an attempt to conflate Robert Mueller not being Senate confirmed to run an investigation with the Attorney General not being Senate confirmed to be the top law enforcement officer who is in a policy setting position. And that is a major difference. And again, to take it a step further, Mueller was confirmed by the Senate for his prior role as FBI director. Now, the easy criticism is, oh, Trump is childish and vindictive. But that's always been the case. The more precise analysis is that Trump is scared and panicking, but he continues to embarrass himself and degrade the office of the presidency. He could simply be truly mortified about what might happen in the next 2 years when Democrats take over the House. Adam Schiff, yes, has gotten under Trump's skin, and he's about to get way more powerful and would actually be able to maybe hold Trump accountable, and Trump's lashing out. And in a way, getting one of these pet names from Trump means you're doing something serious. You're having an impact. Crooked Hillary, Crazy Bernie, Adam Shit. I'm forgetting others as well, right, Pat? On the who else was nicknamed on the left by Trump?
Well, left and right, remember? There was Lion Ted and there was Little Marco. But funny enough, Trump seems to know how to spell little now, which is nice, because before he was spelling it Liddl'. So that's one bright side.
If there's anything that we can say that has improved about Trump's ad hominems is that they seem to be slightly more grammatically correct or something, which is maybe like the weakest silver lining Pat has ever found in many years of looking for and finding silver linings. Listen, Trump's scared, and I hope that Schiff is able to get a lot done in January, and only time will tell. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a right-winger who loves the show. Take a listen to this.
Hey, David. I just wanted to call and let you know I lean more slightly towards the right. I'm a big fan of Michael Savage and Ben Shapiro, but I really like your commentary. I've been listening to you since I was 15 back in 2012. I just want to say you're actually a really good host. I do disagree with you with a lot of things that you say and most of your opinions, but you're a phenomenal host. You got a great you got a great personality, and keep up the good work, David.
I don't know if I should take this as a compliment that the program is even appealing to some right-wingers like fans of Michael Savage and Ben Shapiro, or should I be worried that people who listen to Michael Savage and Ben Shapiro seriously are also finding something in this show that they like? I don't know the answer, but it is scaring me a little bit. We have a great bonus show planned for you today. We have more midterm election updates. Yes, they continue to roll in. We will talk about a major philanthropic contribution that former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg is making. It's very interesting. We will also talk about how Texas students are soon going to be able to learn in public schools that slavery played a central role in the Civil War. Amazing that that's something that they are only now going to start learning. What the hell is going on in Texas? All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Become a member, become a patron, both great ways to get instant access to the bonus show. I'll speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.